York.
In your apartment? In your cute apartment with your little collection of trolls behind you?
Yes, Ninja Turtle trolls right behind me. It's my nerd.
I have a giant stag behind my head, I realized, which was very fitting with the show, but it looks like I have antlers growing out of my head.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's absolutely fitting, definitely. Liv Tyler, you play Meg Abbott on HBO's The Leftovers, which is based on the novel by Tom Perrotta. I was wondering if you had read the book before taking on the role.
No, not before I got involved with the project. It was, I read the script first for the pilot and then bought the book and sort of simultaneously just started reading it and flipping through it and kind of continued to read it all the time, all through filming. Whenever I had a question about something or I just wanted to sort of be in the world, I would just read the book more than the scripts, actually. But,
was that helpful in getting into, not just, the mood of the show, but your character in particular?
yeah, I just love Tom's style of writing. It's so descriptive and it just, I feel like even though I don't really completely relate to these people or what they're going through, I do somehow by the way that he describes what they're feeling and what they're seeing. And so often I would just open it and sort of flip to a random page and just read about any of the characters just to kind of feel the overall essence of the world, I guess, And then always reading about the guilty remnant, just trying to get my head around it because I still don't totally understand it or what the appeal is. So, yeah.
Was that a particularly difficult part of the role for you? Because we don't get to know that much about Meg before she joins the guilty remnant. How
it was really interesting because what I loved so much about Meg when I first read the pilot and then started reading the book was sort of the stuff that we never get to see in this show. They sort of jumped forward and we never really got to do some of that stuff. So that's been kind of interesting for me. It definitely, I'd never done television before this, so just the style of filming and you kind of don't, like with a movie, you know exactly what everything's in the script and you can ask a million questions and you know what the schedule is. And with this, it was a whole new world to me of just living in this kind of ambiguous state where you never really know what's going to happen. But that was also what was going on for the characters. So it was very interesting to kind of both have that experience in a way,
And you and Meg, in that sense, are both sort of new to the guilty remnant, So could you especially relate to her in that sense because you're both entering this sort of new and unfamiliar kind of territory?
Yeah, I mean, I think for Meg, she's just, she's tried so hard to re-enter her life after losing her mother and after what's happened. And she can't, and I think she thinks that everything that's going on is sort of bullshit and she gets more and more angry about it. And I don't think she initially enters the guilty remnant because she really wants to be in a cult or believes in what they are sort of living by. I think it's that she wants to do anything she can to escape what she's feeling, and it's sort of the first thing that's available to her. And she sort of goes to try it out and then gets very into it. But yeah.
Your character is sort of unique just because when we first meet her it's a speaking part, but then of course when she joins the guilty remnant she takes a vow of silence and it becomes a silent part for most of the season. Was that a new challenge for you to play a character without having dialogue to express her feelings?
I actually really enjoyed it. People always make fun of me and say that I should have been a silent film star because I'm always trying to cut my words and express them with feeling and emoting, I guess. A lot of times I think things can be sort of overwritten and you can convey a lot of things without words. But this was very interesting because we had such big groups of us and we weren't talking, but we were also having to communicate a tremendous amount of information and feeling and sort of facts, like those scenes when there's a whole bunch of us together and we're sort of looking at each other and snapping at each other and making all these gestures, but there's large groups of us. That was sort of tricky at first, but we got used to it.
And yeah, you worked a lot, with in the first season with Amy Brenneman and Ann Dowd, who played other members of the Guilty Remnant. And you mentioned being in these large scenes, snapping and gesturing at each other. What's it like, working with other actors in a scene where you don't have dialogue to sort of bounce off of each other?
It just kind of was what it is. What it is. It was. We enjoyed it so much. I mean, it was definitely silly at times and we'd burst into laughter, but most of the time we got very focused and very into it, and we were quite serious about it. For me, the hardest thing was having to write things down because I have the worst handwriting in the world, and that would sort of slow things down a little bit when you're trying to express yourself and you're having to sort of write things down. That was frustrating. But amazing, such a cool, fun thing to get to experience, And then, of course, Meg is very annoyed by the fact that she can't talk, so she just starts talking, and I could definitely relate to that. So
later on in the season, as you mentioned, Meg, starts talking again at some point, and she loses her composure and she lashes out against the preacher Matt, who's played by Christopher Eccleston. After so long of playing that role, being silent, did it feel liberating to sort of get her words back in a sense?
Yeah, it was. It was interesting because when we first started filming, there's a scene in the pilot where I kind of lash out at someone. And I, as a person, as Liv, I'm not known as being a particularly angry person. I think I can be quite soft-spoken. And Damon saw something on that night when I sort of attacked Amy that I think he found interesting, and it sort of intrigued him. And he started to sort of develop that for me a little bit more, which was kind of shocking for me because he kept writing these scenes where I was getting angrier and angrier and constantly lashing out, and it was very interesting because it was something that was sort of happening as we went along, but it was very fun for me to do, and actually very challenging at times because the nature of filming the show, we don't have a lot of time, and it's a very natural style of acting where we really have no hair and makeup, and there's 2 cameras going, and things are often very rushed. And whenever you're doing sort of emotional scenes or sort of explosive scenes, you feel very out of control because, you can actually hurt someone if you're too upset. When I was sort of attacking Chris, you have to, there's a level of emotion and then there's a level of detail as an actor that you have to make sure you don't hurt anyone. But it was very interesting because on many occasions I was sort of sent in and told to just, go with my gut and sort of see what happens and completely let go while everyone was moving around me and they were sort of capturing it very quickly. And there was a scene where I chopped down a tree with an axe, and that was a day where we were very rushed and we ran out of light, and it was supposed to be sort of 3 scenes and we would have shot it over about 3 hours. And Pete Berg took me by the shoulders and he just sort of said, he said something very sweet to me about me as an actress, and he sort of sent me in and told me to just trust myself and go with whatever happened, but to not hurt myself because I was wielding a big axe. And so we wound up shooting that scene in about 5 minutes, and it was another one that was kind of strange because I was very angry and emotional with an axe, but quite fun because it was just very spontaneous,
The fast pace of a TV production, versus the pace on a film set, was that some actors really enjoy the moving really quickly and some of the higher pressure involved to get it in just a couple of takes. Was that something that you felt helped you, or was that a challenge adjusting?
I'm used to that style of filming. I've done a lot of films that are like that as well. But television just in general is a very different, you're doing such a larger amount of material, the amount of episodes, the amount of people. There's an incredible energy to it, but it definitely you have to sort of liberate yourself and just let go and go with it, you know. You can't be as particular and precise about everything, I think, in the same kind of way. You kind of can't think so much. And then I think you get to know your character in a very different way because you're playing that part over a long period of time. And it's always evolving in a different kind of way than working on a film.
And The Leftovers, in addition to being a fast-paced TV production, it's also can be emotionally grueling. It goes to some really dark places emotionally for the characters and for the audience watching. How do you prepare for some of those darker places that the story takes you?
Oh, it's so embarrassing talking about it. It depends on the scene, really. It depends on if you're working alone, if you're working with other actors. Obviously, when you're working with other actors and you're communicating with them and looking at them and you're in it sort of together, it's a very different experience than when you're sort of on your own having a meltdown. But yeah.
Over the course,
this whole world is such an amazing, beautiful thing because there's so much sadness and so much grief, and as well as so much vulnerability in all the characters. Everyone is searching for a way out of their grief, and it's quite beautiful. It's not like just one person sad and struggling and depressed. Everyone is confused and holding on for dear life, and everything's really heightened. And so there's something interesting about that, that there's all these sort of little groups forming and people are trying to learn how to live again with a tremendous amount of anxiety and never knowing what's going to happen. That facade has gone away completely of comfort.
It's interesting. It seems to be part of the tragedy of the show in some ways, that everyone on the show is suffering after the same event, but they're all sort of in conflict with each other. They're sort of suffering alone. Even though everyone's going through the same thing. Is that part of Did you sense that going through the season, that how lonely these characters are?
Yeah, and it's so fascinating just as a character study how everyone reacts completely differently. Like the same event can happen and everyone has some sort of strange, different way of dealing with it. And I thought that was really interesting.
Now, over the course of the first season, Meg, goes from kind of a reluctant new recruit to the guilty remnant, and then by the end of the season, she's much more of a a believer or zealot. What were your thoughts about that whole character progression? By the time the season wrapped, was any of that development of Meg? Did any of that come as a surprise to you?
Yeah, definitely. Again, that was sort of, I was constantly calling Damon and writing to Damon and saying, what's going to happen? What's going on here? And never really knowing what was going to happen. And I still don't right now. And it took me a minute to get used to that. I found it very frustrating at first. And I couldn't tell if it was a personal thing and then I realized that Damon sort of likes to torture you a little bit, not in a mean way, but he doesn't want you to have all the answers and he doesn't want you to know what's going to happen. And sometimes there'll be a situation where he can sort of tell you that something's going to happen or not tell you. And he sort of often will err on the side of not telling you what's going to happen. So now I've just gotten kind of used to it. And even now I know going into the second season, he hasn't told me much, but that I will go further into the guilty remnant in quite a fanatical kind of way. And I was like, oh boy, okay. But that's all I know. So I just had a baby too. So when he told me that I was pregnant and feeling very female and not fanatical in that way at all, but
yeah, it's I had a chance to talk to some of your co-stars, and they all talk about how they're left in the dark like that, and how they don't know necessarily what's coming up from episode to episode. While that's probably one of the bigger differences between this and a movie set, was it helpful in some ways? Because when you don't know what's going to happen, you're not necessarily you're sort of in the same shoes that your character is in.
Yeah, for that reason, it was incredible. It's tricky because you don't really know how to prepare. So as an actor, you're like, what am I doing? How do I prepare for this? I'm constantly waiting to find out when I'm working. And, sometimes we would get a script 4 days before we started filming. So it's not a lot of time to prepare. But what you start to realize is that you're already prepared because you already are that person, and that the more the time goes on and the closer you become to your character and to the whole sort of situation, that you just have to trust in that and sort of go with it. And that's what's so beautiful about television writing is you know, things can change all the time, and it's so nuanced, and they're writing something more interesting for you each time. And in a way, that's what life is like, and that's what people are like. And we don't really know what's going to happen all the time, and we can't always be prepared and know all our lines. But
this sort of thing is a a big leap of faith. And you mentioned talking, that you talked to Damon, and he gave you some guidance and some answers, and some answers he didn't give you. Was there a lot of leaning on sort of the writers and directors to sort of guide your way forward?
I became very close to Mimi Leader when she came on board, and I am very, very grateful to her. I found her overall vision of the whole thing to be really extraordinary and clear, and she just became sort of my beacon in a way, and I again I got used to not asking too many questions. There was a part, or you would be annoying if you were the person constantly asking questions. Part of it you just have to trust, but I knew that when I did have a question and I needed an answer that I could really trust and that I could do something with. Sometimes you need an answer because you want to do something. And for me, that person was Mimi, definitely. And it was funny because I realized that we started to, if you would ask everybody different questions, like you could ask the costume designer something, and key makeup something, and one of the drivers something, and one of the actors something, and suddenly you'd get like a full story about either a script coming up or something that happened. So that was kind of, you had to do a little bit of detective work to figure it all out. Certain heads of department get information before we do even, so I knew who to go to for information.
We learn a little bit about Meg in the first season, but we don't get as much of her backstory as we do some of the other characters. And you mentioned reading the book along the way. Did that help you fill in some of the blanks, or were you sort of imagining a sort of backstory or an internal life for this character to sort of inform your performance?
Yes, but in some ways I was always waiting for Damon to tell me. And that was really frustrating because I know what happened to her, and I know, of course, my overall idea of who she is as a person and the things that have happened to her. But I was sort of waiting to not be too fixed in them to see what was going to happen. And I still am in some ways. And I definitely found that tricky. Sort of like waiting for the episode when they would tell my story, because we all have a story. And in the first season, we really only got to see a couple of the characters really in a very in-depth kind of focused way. And then the rest was sort of this constant canvas of people moving in and out. There was a lot going on, a lot of information.
The Emmys are coming up in a few months. Yeah, the nominations will be in, I think, July, and then the show itself in either late August or early September. I can't remember when they are this year. If you're nominated yourself, actors submit episodes that they can, of their best work to a panel of Emmy judges, and sometimes the actor chooses, and sometimes the network or the producers choose. I was wondering if you had a particular highlight episode for your character or your performance from the first season that you think might represent your best.
I really liked the pilot, not just for me, but just overall, for everyone's work and the direction, and just the sort of, there was a special feeling in the pilot that was really raw, and it was very hot when we were filming, and it was all very new, and I really liked that one a lot. But I asked Damon that question when we had to submit all of this stuff for the Emmys, and he said episode 2, I think, for me. But I haven't watched them for a while. It's been a year, isn't that crazy? And I had a baby, and I wasn't watching The Leftovers, but I should have been.
Yeah, that might be challenging, given how intense the subject matter is to have to have a new child and then be to watch this show that's so dark. It sometimes might not be the show you necessarily want to tune into.
Well, it's funny because I always love the experience of working more than watching the finished product. But if it's a film, I can handle it because it's like an hour and a half or 2 hours. But this was meant like many films, so I could only watch so much. I had to take a little break at one point after I watched the first few, and then I was away and I was traveling, so I didn't get to see them all. And then I kind of came back to them, and I was like, they're really great, but I've seen enough. I was there.
Well, yeah, I want to congratulate you on the show and on the first season and the second season coming up. Yeah, thank you so much
I'm
for
so
talking to me.
excited to go back to work.
Oh, really? When do you go back?
Next month in June.
All right, so I want best of luck on that, and best of luck at the Emmys coming up. It was great talking to you.
Thank you so much. It was nice to meet you.